Welcome to the weekly Come Follow Me Study podcast on the Speak Peace to My Soul channel, where we seek Christ, deepen our discipleship, and find quiet strength in His Word. In today's Come Follow Me deep dive, we're exploring Doctrine and Covenants 67 through 70, a powerful reminder that the Lord's words are worth more than all the riches of the world. We'll look at what it means to trust divine revelation, how early saints struggled to receive and publish revelations, and why the Scriptures, even with their imperfections, are still holy and life-changing. Let's dive into this week's study and discover how we can treasure the Word of the Lord in our own lives. So today we're really getting into Doctrine and Covenants sections 71 through 75, and these revelations, they touch on some really fundamental human challenges, things that honestly feel just as relevant now as they did back then.
Absolutely. We're talking about dealing with criticism, understanding leadership roles, and, well, how we all play a part in sharing the gospel, real life stuff.
Exactly. It's about finding that strength and purpose in the Lord's Word, even when things get, complicated. Let's start by setting the scene a bit. We're in late 1831 Ohio. Joseph Smith is working incredibly hard, translating, building the church, and then, bam! Public criticism hits.
And not just from anyone.
Right. It's from Ezra Booth, a former member, someone who'd been involved, who then turns and publishes these really scathing letters in a local newspaper.
Yeah, trying to tear down Joseph's reputation, undermine the whole work. The section heading for 71 even mentions unfriendly feelings developing because of it.
That must have been so difficult, especially when criticism comes from someone who used to be, well, one of you. It really makes you wonder, what do you do? What's the Lord's way to handle that?
It's a huge question. And you're right, the source of the criticism makes it particularly tough. Ezra Booth, this wasn't just a casual observer who disagreed. No, I mean, historical sources tell us he had witnessed some pretty significant things. He saw Joseph use God's power to heal someone. That's profound.
Okay.
And not only that, he was actually invited by Joseph to go on that first trip to survey the land of Zion in Missouri. Imagine that, being part of identifying the gathering place.
So he had seen divine power. He'd been part of this sacred foundational work.
Exactly. So for him to then turn so strongly against it, writing these public attacks, well, you can imagine how unsettling that was for the saints. It hits differently when it's someone who, knew better, or at least should have.
Definitely adds a layer of betrayal, almost,
Yeah.
or deep confusion.
Precisely. And it raises questions about testimony, about what keeps us grounded when challenges arise. So in the face of this specific situation, the Lord gives counsel to Joseph and Sidney Rigdon. It's right there in Doctrine and Covenants 71.
And what's the core instruction? Is it about fighting back?
Yeah.
Debating him?
Well, that's what's so interesting. It's not primarily about refutation point by point. Verse 1 says to confound their enemies, yes, but how? By proclaiming the gospel, by declaring the truth.
Okay. So let's focus on dismantling the criticism itself and more on just shining the light brighter.
That's a great way to put it. It's a proactive strategy. Don't get dragged down into the mudslinging. Don't give the falsehoods more airtime by constantly arguing against them. Instead, focus on the positive message. Teach the gospel. Testify of Christ. Share the revelations. It's about elevating the conversation, centering it back on the truth, not the contention.
So declaring the truth means sticking to the core message, the good news.
Exactly. It's about overwhelming the darkness with light, essentially, and trusting that the truth has its own inherent power. And then connected to that trust, you get this incredible promise in verse 9. This is one for the ages.
Which promise is that?
No weapon that is formed against it shall prosper.
Wow. Okay, unpack that a little. Does that mean no one will ever attack the church?
Oh, definitely not. History clearly shows opposition is, well, pretty much guaranteed when you're doing God's work. Critics will arise, challenges will come, sometimes even persecution.
Right.
But this promise means those efforts won't ultimately succeed. They won't stop the Lord's work. They won't derail his purposes. His kingdom will move forward. It's an assurance of ultimate victory, despite the battles along the way.
That's incredibly comforting. Knowing that even when things look difficult, God's work prevails.
It is. And it frames the instruction to declare truth, not as a desperate defense, but as a confident proclamation rooted in that ultimate assurance.
Okay, so this situation with Booth, it's historical, but wow, does it resonate today?
It really does.
I mean, we see criticism of faith, the Savior, the church.
Yeah.
It happens online, in conversations, sometimes even with people we care about who just don't get it or have questions. It can be genuinely upsetting. So the big question then is, how do we take these principles from D&C 71 and apply them? What does this mean for you listening right now when you face those moments?
That's the crucial connection, isn't it? Moving from history to our lives. These aren't just stories, they're living principles. We're invited to take the Lord's instructions to Joseph and Sidney and the promised blessings and see how they fit our own circumstances.
So how do we learn to respond effectively?
Well, one of the best ways is to look at the Savior himself. He faced constant criticism, often from very knowledgeable people.
Right, the Pharisees, Sadducees.
Exactly. Think about Matthew 22, the trap about paying tribute to Caesar.
Ah, yes. Render unto Caesar.
Precisely. He didn't get defensive. He didn't engage in a political argument. He answered wisely, succinctly, and elevated the principle, give Caesar what's his and God what's his. Brilliant deflection.
It really was.
Or think about when he stood before the Sanhedrin in Matthew 26. False accusations flying everywhere. Mostly, he remained silent, dignified, patient, only speaking directly when asked about his divinity.
Thou hast said. Powerful restraint.
Incredible restraint. And in John 10, when they questioned his works, he didn't launch into a complex theological proof. He basically said, if you don't believe my words, believe the works themselves. Let the evidence speak.
So the lessons there are patience, wisdom.
Relying on something beyond just clever arguments.
All of that. Patience under provocation, wisdom in choosing words or silence, and a deep reliance on divine power, on the truth itself, rather than just trying to win a debate with our own smarts. Embodying the truth. And other scriptures give us more layers, too. Matthew 18 suggests addressing concerns directly, maybe privately first. A principle of reconciliation.
Good reminder.
Ephesians 4 tells us to put away bitterness, anger, evil speaking, and instead be kind, tender-hearted, forgiving, even towards critics. Our demeanor matters deeply. It reflects our discipleship.
That's hard sometimes, but so important.
It is. And 2 Timothy 3 straight up tells us that living godly often brings persecution. It helps normalize it in a way. It's not always because we did something wrong. Sometimes it's just part of the past.
Okay, sets expectations realistically. And James 1.19 classic advice. Be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath, listening, understanding, staying calm. These are divine tools for difficult conversations.
So practically then, if we need to correct a falsehood or share our perspective today, how do we do it peacefully, effectively?
Well, the counsel often involves starting with humility and kindness, not like you have all the answers and they're just wrong.
Right. Avoid that superior tone.
Exactly. Maybe begin by genuinely acknowledging their perspective, showing respect for their view, even if you disagree. Something like, I can see why you might feel that way, or thanks for sharing your thoughts on that. It opens the door instead of slamming it shut.
Disarms the situation a bit.
It can. And then from that place, humbly and kindly share what you believe. Focus on your testimony of Christ, his teachings. It's not about winning, it's about sharing light, bearing witness, planting a seed.
And maybe not expecting immediate conversion right there on the spot.
Absolutely. The goal is understanding, bearing a clear testimony, not necessarily immediate agreement, and, practicing this. Role-playing with a friend or family member, thinking through how you'd phrase things calmly and clearly that can really build confidence.
That's a great practical tip.
And for anyone wanting to explore this more, the Come Follow Me materials point to some really helpful resources.
Oh yeah, like what?
There's a section in the Gospel Library called Helping Others with Questions. Very practical stuff. And talks like President Oaks's Loving Others and Living with Differences are fantastic for navigating disagreements respectfully.
Okay, good ones to look up.
And Elder Klevinget's talk, Valiant Discipleship in the Latter Days, also hits these themes really well, offering that modern prophetic perspective on staying strong and faithful amidst challenges. They all kind of work together to give you a solid framework.
Excellent. So maybe take a moment now, you listening. What stands out to you from the Lord's counsel, from the Savior's example, about responding to criticism? How might that change your approach?
Okay, that's a lot to think about on handling opposition with grace and truth. And it flows nicely into our next section because dealing with challenges often involves relying on the structure and leadership the Lord provides.
Exactly. Which brings us to Doctrine and Covenants 72 and the calling of bishops.
Right. We meet Newell K. Whitney, called as a bishop. And it's interesting because his duties back then were quite different from a bishop's role today, weren't they?
Oh, very different in some key ways, which actually highlights how the church structure adapts over time. Bishop Whitney, for instance, was heavily involved in overseeing the consecration of property.
The law of consecration, right, where people deeded property to the church. Yes. He managed that whole system, receiving properties, giving back stewardships for people's needs, managing the surplus for the poor. It was a massive temporal and spiritual responsibility. Much more than just finances, it was stewarding the community's entire economic well-being, in a sense.
Wow. And didn't he also have a role in the gathering to Missouri?
He did. He was authorized to give saints permission, basically a certificate, to settle in Zion. He acted as a sort of gatekeeper for the gathering. His store, the N.K. Whitney store, became the central hub for all these activities.
So a very different set of tasks compared to today's bishops managing wards.
Very different specifics, yes. But what's fascinating is how the core principles remain remarkably consistent.
Like what?
Like the fundamental role of a bishop as a shepherd, responsible for both the spiritual and temporal welfare of the saints, caring for the poor, providing guidance, administering affairs. Those core elements are timeless, even as the how evolves. Take the phrase render an account in D&C 72, verse 5. In Whitney's time, that was quite literal regarding consecrated property. People accounted for their stewardships. But how does that principle of accountability apply to us and our bishops today?
Well, tithing settlement comes to mind. We declare our faithfulness there.
Good example. That's a direct accounting. What else?
Temple recommend interviews. We talk about our obedience, our readiness to the temple. That feels like rendering an account of our discipleship.
Exactly. It's about our overall stewardship, spiritual and temporal, and being accountable to the leader the Lord has placed over us. It's a process for growth, for alignment with God's standards.
Oh.
Then there's the concept of the Lord's storehouse in verses 10 and 12.
Right. What was that historically? Like a literal building.
It certainly included that the place where consecrated goods, food, supplies were kept to care for the poor. Bishop Whitney managed that. But its meaning goes deeper, both then and now.
How so?
Today, the Lord's storehouse still includes financial means, primarily fast offerings that bishops use to help those in need. That direct line of caring for the poor continues. But think broader. What else constitutes the Lord's storehouse in a ward? It's not just money.
People's time,
Yeah.
service, talents they share.
Precisely. Every hour spent ministering, every skill used in a calling, every act of service, every bit of compassion offered, that's all part of the Lord's storehouse. It's this amazing pool of resources, tangible and intangible, that builds the community, strengthens individuals, and accomplishes God's purposes.
I like that. So when we serve or share our talents, we're contributing to this divine storehouse.
You are. You're participating in a system designed to lift everyone, including yourself. It fosters unity, compassion. It's a celestial economy, really. Our individual contributions are vital.
That's a powerful perspective, the storehouse, as all our combined efforts. And seeing how those core bishopric principles endure, it really makes you reflect. So here's that personal question again for you listening. How has the Lord blessed you, specifically, or your family, through the service of a bishop?
It's such a valuable reflection because their ministry is often so personal, so tailored. Maybe pause and really think. Was there specific counsel that helped you through a tough time? A word of encouragement that felt divinely timed? Maybe assistance during a financial struggle? Or perhaps just their steady example, their testimony strengthened yours when you felt shaky?
Could be big things or small things, right?
Absolutely. Even just the way they organized the ward, trying to make sure people feel seen and cared for. Elder Quentin L. Cook spoke beautifully about this in his talk, Bishop Shepherds Over the Lord's Flock.
What did he emphasize?
He really painted that picture of bishops as true shepherds, sacrificing so much personally to watch over the flock. They're common judges, they administer welfare, they interview for sacred ordinances, they teach, they testify. It's an immense, often unseen labor of love.
Representing the Savior in their calling.
Exactly. So when we see their ministry clearly, we often see the Lord's hand reaching out to us personally through them. Their efforts enable so many blessings in the ward.
So take that moment. What specific examples come to your mind where a bishop's service felt like a direct blessing from the Lord in your life? It really underscores the strength that comes from inspired leadership. And that leads us naturally into thinking about our role as individual disciples in the Lord's work, which always includes sharing his message.
Yes, it's a constant theme.
I find it fascinating that in section 73, Joseph and Sidney, even after returning from a mission and being told to keep translating the Bible, a huge task, we're still told to share the gospel.
Right. It wasn't, okay, focus only on translation now. It was continue translating and keep preaching and proclaiming when you have the chance.
It really shows that sharing the gospel isn't just a specific assignment you get sometimes. It's It's just part of being a disciple, woven into everything else.
That's the key insight. It's not a separate box to check. It's integrated into the life of faith. And Section 73 uses that interesting word, practicable. Share the gospel inasmuch as it is practicable.
Practicable, meaning realistic, doable.
Yeah, I think that's the sense not only when it's easy, but in a way that can be done realistically alongside everything else. For Joseph and Sidney, it meant balancing translation and preaching. For us, it means finding natural, authentic ways to share light within our daily lives, our jobs, our families, our friendships.
So it's about being aware, ready for opportunities the Spirit provides, even amidst the busyness.
Exactly. Being prepared to give that reason for the hope within us, as Peter says. Then we get to section 75, verses 1 through 16. This part speaks directly to those called to formally proclaim the gospel, like missionaries.
Okay.
But the principles in there are powerful for all of us. It really gives us two things: insights into how to share effectively, guided by the Spirit, and a clear picture of how the Lord supports us when we do. It's His work, and He partners with us. He empowers our efforts.
I love that idea of partnership. And verse 3 in section 75 really jumps out with that contrast. Neither be idle, but labor with your might. That's pretty direct.
It is. No ambiguity there.
So what does it mean, do you think, to tarry or be idle in this context versus truly laboring with your might? What does that look like for us?
Great question. Being idle or tarrying, it might not mean outright refusal. Often it's more subtle. It could be procrastination, waiting for the perfect moment that never comes.
Fear, maybe. Fear of saying the wrong thing.
Fear is a big one. Fear of rejection, feeling inadequate, just being comfortable and not wanting to rock the boat. So maybe you don't bring up faith when a friend is struggling, or you don't invite someone to an activity or share a spiritual thought. It's a kind of inertia, knowing you could, but not quite doing it.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah.
So what's the flip side? Laboring with might.
Laboring with might suggests active, conscious, diligent effort, giving it your best energy, your best intention, but again, not necessarily being pushy or aggressive. It's about being spiritually attuned, looking for opportunities, acting on promptings. It could be simply listening with empathy and then offering a Christ-centered thought, sharing something uplifting online, inviting someone to serve alongside you, living your faith so authentically that people ask you about it.
So it's about being intentional, observant, and courageous enough to act when prompted.
Exactly. Stepping forward in faith when the Spirit nudges, even if it feels a bit uncomfortable. Using your unique gifts and circumstances to share light. And the promised blessings for doing so are amazing. The Lord promises His Spirit. He promises to give us words in the moment. He reinforces that promise about no weapon prospering against us long term.
Wow.
And D&C 75 verse 11 promises we'll reap the reward of our diligence. That reward isn't just seeing others change, it's the joy, the strength and testimony, the deeper conversion that happens in us when we serve and share.
That makes sense. Sharing reinforces our own conviction.
It absolutely does. It deepens our own connection to the Savior and His gospel. And this ties into making gospel sharing feel normal and natural, like some church resources emphasize. Not forced, not awkward, just an authentic part of who you are.
Because you genuinely want others to feel the peace and joy you found.
Exactly. It comes from a place of love. It's like that wonderful old hymn, I'll go where you want me to go. That spirit of willingness, of dedication. I'll say what you want me to say, dear Lord. I'll be what you want me to be. That's laboring with might.
A full commitment.
And President Uchtdorf talked about this principle of work ethic too, and two principles for any economy. He spoke about that deep satisfaction that comes from knowing you've truly given your best effort in the Lord's service, regardless of the immediate outcome, that feeling of having labored diligently.
Yeah, there's a peace in knowing you gave it your all.
There really is. The Lord asks for our might, our best effort, and He blesses that effort profoundly.
So another moment for personal reflection for everyone listening. What small, consistent actions could represent your laboring with might in sharing the gospel right where you are now? What's one step you could take this week to move from maybe being a bit idle to being more actively engaged? Okay, what a journey through these sections today. We started with D&C 71, looking at facing criticism like Joseph and Sidney did with Ezra Booth. The takeaway: proclaim truth boldly, trust God's promises, no weapon shall prosper.
Such a foundational principle.
Then we move to section 72, Newell K. Whitney and the role of bishops. We saw how specific duties change, but the core principles, shepherd, temporal, and spiritual care, the Lord's storehouse encompassing time and talents, those endure and bless us deeply.
Right, that enduring structure is key.
And finally, sections 73 and 75 really pushed us to see gospel sharing not as an extra task, but as a practicable, integrated part of discipleship. Understanding what it means to labor with your might versus being idle and trusting the Lord's support as we do.
It really covers a lot of ground for practical discipleship, and it all comes back beautifully to that opening theme we started with. The idea that the Lord's words are worth more than all the riches of the world. It's easy to say we believe that, but these sections, 71 through 75, they really challenge us, don't they? They ask us to show it.
How so?
Well, consider this as we wrap up. How do your daily choices, the way you respond to criticism, the way you sustain your leaders, the way you actively look for chances to share the gospel naturally, how do those actions demonstrate that you truly believe?
His words are the most precious treasure.
Ooh, that's a searching question. Do my actions line up with that belief?
Exactly. Are we just reading these verses, nodding along? Or are we letting them genuinely change how we live, how we prioritize, how we interact with others? It's an invitation to constantly deepen that conviction through our actions, truly treasuring His word by living it.
Thanks for joining us today on Speak Peace to My Soul. We hope this deep dive has helped you feel more grounded in the Savior's teachings and more confident in your walk of faith. If something today spoke to your heart, we invite you to like, share, and subscribe. And we'd love to hear from you in the comments. What helps you treasure the word of the Lord in your daily life? Until next time, let's keep walking in faith together, one step at a time, with God leading the way.